A nice, quiet, uneventful week. Come on, man. Yes? Yes, Mr. President? Let me guess, you're calling about Admiral Burnett? What has this hasty tweeter done now? He has been given out what? Shoot to kill order. That's it. He will be getting demoted to captain. Get to the chopper. Leave for Federation headquarters. Get in his shuttlecraft. Leave the shuttle bay. Get to his Enterprise and do in a 5-year mission. That will cool his head off. Yes, sir. For sure. His crew? What about his PGS community? He can recruit people from there, okay? First officer should be, of course, Willow Yang. One has to be brains on the bridge, okay? On comms? I don't know. Perhaps that girl from Slovakia, Vesna. With a spicy talk. Could be a good first contact, okay? On the helm? Let me guess. From Sweden. Stubble McShave. Because if they encounter a time paradox, some has to know how the wheels of time are turning, okay? What about that German doofus? Do you think they will encounter space Nazis? And the translator has been broken? Or you mean as comedy relief? Yes, think that could work, because I think Admiral Burnett, no, Captain Burnett likes this slapstick humor since Star Trek 09. Yes, that is his taste, yes. So perhaps there will be a place for that guy also. Richard as counselor, okay, could be working. Jim Boyer, security man, okay, but faces set on stun, okay? No open carrying, okay? Yes, I will inform him, okay? He will be leaving this instant.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your what am I? The Archbishop of Banterbury, your Chancellor of Cheerfulness, of course, your sommelier of cinema, and not to be forgotten, your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am Rob casting at you. Excuse me, Rob casting you from the Robservatory today. This is Robservations, episode number 437, coming at you, you imagination connoisseurs that make up this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. Once again, I have a deluge of letters to get through, which I am still doing. Obviously, I wasn't here yesterday. I was actually working on the show that shall not be named yet. Because it hasn't been announced, but for a show that's going to run so far 3 seasons. Yesterday was the halfway point of the entire series, and it's strange to be 12 episodes into a show that has yet to be announced. But these are strange times in which we live in. But it was fun, and I really enjoyed yesterday's episode. By the way. Before I get to everybody's letters, though, man, I had to read this article, and I wanted to share it with you because, frankly, it kind of bummed me out. I'll flat out say it, and it's about Ridley Scott. I love Ridley Scott. I've loved Ridley Scott since I saw Alien, was the first movie I saw of his. I went back and later saw The Duelists. I've seen every Ridley Scott movie. I love Ridley Scott. I don't always love his films, though. And it's very interesting that he made a movie like Alien, which I loved. I think Alien is basically a perfect movie. I think everything that happened, I mean, its conception and its execution is near to perfection. And if you ever wanted to see a sci-fi horror film, it is. People say 2001 is the greatest science fiction movie ever made. Alien is the greatest science fiction horror film ever made. And one of the things that I have always liked in fantasy literature, whether it's science fiction, fantasy, horror, I guess the first time I ever really knew about it, and that's only because it was spelled out to me, was sort of Lovecraftian horror. If you read H.P. Lovecraft, the idea of Cthulhu and the old gods and everything that's maybe out there that we are never going to understand, that human beings, I mean, maybe one day, thousands of years, millions of years from now, we will be able to know certain things, but the idea that there's an unknowability to the vast cosmic infinitude. And it really begins with the question, why are we here? You know, it's like the question V'ger was asking in Star Trek The Motion Picture. Is this all there is? Is there nothing more? I mean, every time we've ever wondered about the great beyond or what our purpose in life is or what's going to happen after we die, these are unanswerable and unknowable questions. I know people of faith have answers, but they can't tell you exactly what's going to happen. I've talked a lot on this show about how my sister, who is definitely a woman of faith, she was born again, and we've often chatted about the afterlife and things like that. And I think certain people have this idea that the afterlife would be similar to what corporeal existence is. Like there's an actual place that you go to, like with landscapes and things like that. I mean, I maybe there is, but that's not the way I would picture it. I think we would move into if there is an afterlife, the idea to me would be that it would be very different than what our existence is now, whether we exist as beings of energy or thought, very Star Trekian, like Sargon and the remainders of his people. So anyway, I've always liked that, the unknowability of things and our speculation about those things. Well, one of the things that I always loved about Alien was the alien itself. Like, as everyone remembers, when the crew of the Nostromo sets down, I think I had a bug in my mouth. When the Nostromo sets down on LV-426, answering the distress call of the derelict ship, and when the crew comes across this clearly alien craft, when they go in it, they find the space jockey, and then underneath they find thousands and thousands in the egg chamber of the ship. There's all of these thousands of eggs, and only one of them, when Kane disturbs an egg and the face hugger burns through his helmet and attaches itself to him and lays an egg in his stomach, and it later becomes the chest burster, which later grows to the full alien. There's so many questions that are asked, but there's no answers. And I love the fact that we would never know where the derelict alien ship was from, and we would never know who the space jockey was. I mean, that was, to me, part of the appeal of that film was when you left it, the lingering questions were, why did that ship have those eggs in it? And what happened to the space jockey? Was there ever any more of the crew? And that's why the movie was indeed called Alien. And we're so used to, because of things like Star Trek or now Star Wars, and that aliens, and of course all the science fiction that's been written, like we would be able to interact with aliens. Like eventually the cosmos is knowable. Humanity will span the cosmos. We will travel between stars. We will meet alien life forms and interact with them. But what I loved about Alien is that when I first saw it, and I've seen it a million times, we don't know these answers. And I don't think we ever should have known these answers, because it's it's asking the questions that and speculating that fires the imagination. And once you know the answers, they're never as good as, although maybe not all the time, sometimes they're good. But for the most part, Alien, I mean, there's so many meanings to what it could be. Are we the aliens? The cosmic, unforgiving void. Anara, the movie I always talk about, the Swedish science fiction film that also does a really good job without having aliens in it, but dealing with the cosmic infinitude and what it all means. And one of the things that I have to say, in my imagination connoisseur life, one of the things that I was really bummed out by was the movie Prometheus. Ridley Scott's return to the alien universe. It's obviously, clearly one of the most beautiful science fiction films ever made, fully realized, but ultimately, it was kind of dumb as a box of rocks, and I didn't understand that. And it posits the idea that engineers are seeding planets, but then it doesn't really take that idea very far. Like, why? Why do this? And I would have thought that this alien civilization would be more advanced than we could even comprehend. And yet it turned out not to be the case. And we've seen 2 alien films now. We've seen Prometheus and Alien Covenant. And all they have, in my mind, all they succeeded in doing was demystifying the original Alien. And as a matter of fact, apparently now the xenomorph that we saw in Alien, was it just the product of a paranoid android from Earth's experimentation on life forms using this other technology that we really don't know much about? I found the whole thing very, very disappointing, I should say. And that, I don't like that. I mean, I'm a guy that I love Ridley Scott's The Counselor. I'm a huge Ridley fan, but I just feel like these films, they kind of let us down, I feel. And Alien Covenant especially. Its vision of the engineer's home planet was not exactly, I mean, it was one step up above Land of the Lost, I thought. And how stupid did the engineers turn out to be? Like, they have no protocols. If their ships come back, no one calls them and goes, "Hey, man, who are you? Why are you flying our ship?" "Oh, just go ahead and, drop the black goo on us and destroy our civilization," whatever it was. It was disappointing. Well, I read an article in Gizmodo that this was published on Sunday, and it was referring to an LA Times article with Ridley Scott, and I figured I'd share it with you. Ridley Scott wants to use a new movie to answer an obvious question raised by Alien, which is what I thought he's been trying to do in the last 2 movies, but apparently not. Ridley Scott seems like there's somewhere in his brain that is always thinking about Alien. He's never quite been able to leave the franchise behind, and after returning with Prometheus and Alien Covenant, it does feel like he's camped out to stay. And while Covenant didn't do well enough to demand an immediate follow-up and the Disney-Fox merger complicated plans for a new movie, rest assured, he's still thinking. Talking to the LA Times recently, Scott revealed one of those ideas, which is to answer a question begged by the initial film. What I always thought when I was making the first one was, why would a creature like this be made? And why was it traveling in what I always thought was a kind of warcraft, which was carrying a cargo of these eggs? What was the purpose of the vehicle? And what was the purpose of the eggs? That's the thing to question. Who, why, and for what purpose is the next idea, I think Scott said. That's the question, huh? Who made the ship and where was it going? By the time the crew of the Nostromo reaches the ship, that question is far beyond the point, with survival quickly moving up to the top of the list of concerns. But it's a lingering mystery, and Prometheus didn't exactly provide clear answers about those sorts of concrete concerns. The other big question, though, is this question worth answering? The mystery adds a lot to the mystique of that movie's horror. Sometimes it's best to just not know. When a xenomorph has you in its sights, what other information do you really need? I agree wholeheartedly with this sentiment. I just, we now live in a world where it seems like the great franchises, Star Wars did it. We got the 3 prequel films, but in that film, I felt that while I have problems certainly with the execution, the story that was being told in the prequels is one worth telling. How does a free republic become an empire? Always compelling stuff. We'd never seen that. While I feel that the execution certainly left a lot to be desired, I've always said, as a Star Wars story, I enjoy the prequel trilogy. As movies, not so much. But there is a lot of good Star Wars stuff in them. And now we have Star Trek. And the funny thing to me is, with Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek '09, I will discount the Kelvin films. But like Dave Cullen, if you ever watched the Dave Cullen show, he was talking about his response to Strange New Worlds. He delineated 3 different Star Treks. There's canonical Star Trek that went from 67 to 2005, ending with Enterprise. There is what is now known as Prime Star Trek, which is Discovery, Picard, Lower Decks, whatever else the hell they make, Strange New Worlds. And then there's the Kelvin universe. Now, what I thought about Star Trek Discovery has not really given us much illumination or why even bother with that prequel. It's a prequel. It takes place before the time of Kirk and Spock, obviously, but why? Why choose to set a show there? How is that helping illuminate the franchise? What it's done is it's just the creators are just going back and changing the franchise to suit what they think is a modern storytelling sensibility, when it's really exactly the opposite of that. You should serve, if you're going to do a Star Trek prequel, you should serve Star Trek. You should look at it as there's an upcoming episode. By the way, apparently I was wrong that the Inglorious Treksperts episodes were not taken down. I was not removed from that show, which was very nice. I was told that it was going to happen, but it did not happen. And I very much appreciate my friends over there making sure that a lot of the great work we did is still available. So I very much appreciate that. There's an upcoming Star Trek Inglorious Treksperts podcast with the author of a very interesting part of Star Trek history. And it was something that was going to get made, I'll tease it. It was something that was going to get made after Enterprise, but before Star Trek '09. And it's fascinating. And the writer who wrote this project approached Star Trek. He didn't like Star Trek. He didn't like science fiction very much. But he approached Star Trek as if it was a historical thing. He jumped into the mythology, and he wrote a phenomenal canonical piece of work that I'm very sorry that we never got it. But I do think that if they ever made another theatrical Star Trek film, because Paramount already owns this piece of work and it's great, they should go back and they should make it. Okay. I would assume that I am back. This frame rate issue is very odd. I hope that whole thing wasn't going nutso. But anyway, so that's the thing. I mean, going back and this idea of prequels is strange to me. I don't quite get the fascination. But anyway, if you've got a great idea and you've got a great story to tell that illuminates a period of time and, say, a franchise's history that we haven't seen before, and it can add to the tapestry of what we know, I would say, okay. I don't think, as much as I liked Prometheus from a design standpoint and the way it was shot, again, I dumb as a box of rocks, that movie, and I actually think the existence of both Prometheus and Alien Covenant actually diminish Alien. Aliens doesn't. Alien 3, especially the Renegade cut, it's not really a director's cut, but the assembly that appears on the Blu-ray is pretty good. And even, look, Alien Resurrection, for all of its goofiness, there's still some interesting things there. I just think it's an odd duck of a movie that doesn't entirely work. But, yeah, I really had high hopes. I mean, Prometheus is one of the most disappointing films I think I've ever seen. And it bums me out that I didn't love it. Anyway, I wanted to jump into what people have to say. First of all, let me get back to Willow Yang sent in a super chat to me yesterday that I didn't read because I wasn't on yesterday. And Willow asked, she says, when I watched The Most Toys, that was the episode I was talking about a couple days ago, the Next Generation episode with Kivas Fajo, the collector, I thought it was clear that Data tried to kill Fajo. The big thing for me was that Data lies to Riker about it. Was Data lying when he said in Hero Worship that androids don't lie? I know Lore lies, but he's a special case. You know, that's obviously, Willow, a great question. And my take on it, I was explaining, I think Data, I mean, Fajo's a straight up murderer. He was a menace. He was a bad dude. And I think Data, with his logic subroutine, all of that, he was brought to a certain conclusion, and he could not risk being responsible. If he had the opportunity to stop another person from losing their life because of Fajo, then I think that's what he was trying to do. So, again, I think it's dicey, but I want to believe that when the phaser went off, Data really was going to eliminate Fajo, especially after what went on. And yeah, I think that he did lie to Riker, because I think it was something that he was grappling with. But we shall see. Or we'll never see, because we'll never know. I mean, it's really a question. What do you guys think? How do you interpret the end of the penultimate episode of Star Trek The Next Generation's third season, The Most Toys? Let me see, this chat here. Let me jump in here. This comes from Brock Aaron Paraf. Paraf. What a cool name, Brock Aaron Paraf. I like that. Hey, Robert, big fan from Chicago's suburbs. What do you think Quentin Tarantino's 10th and final movie will be? What genre? I know he said it will not be Star Trek, so what then? I think he should still do sci-fi as a swan song. What do you think? I'm a big Tarantino fan. I do not know, to be honest. I have no clue what his 10th movie is going to be. We know it's not going to be Star Trek. You know what? Obviously, he makes movies about the things he likes, his predilections, picadillos. I mean, they're all in his movies for all to see. I think whatever his 10th movie is going to be, it might be his most personal film yet. I don't necessarily see it. I don't think it's going to be a horror or a science fiction film, although it might be, because I don't know. Quentin Tarantino is sort of his own genre, even when he's doing a genre pastiche, whether it's Kill Bill or Inglourious Bastards or Django Unchained. I mean, it's I don't know, but I think it's going to be a return. I would imagine it has some kind of crime bent to it, something that'll take us full circle from Reservoir Dogs all the way through his oeuvre to something to bring us back to that point. But I don't know what that is. And I'm saying this, I'm completely talking out of my ass. I have no idea. Darren Barnes sends in a tip and says, "Hi, Rob. I did a top 5 on the John Campea show of 70s and 80s sci-fi. Number 1 was The Man from Atlantis. Unfortunately, John was not aware of this show. Please tell me you have seen it. Perhaps I'm just getting too old. Oh, man, not only have I seen The Man from Atlantis. So The Man from Atlantis was a show before Patrick Duffy was on Dallas. He was the Man from Atlantis. He was basically like Aquaman or the Submariner. And there was a really cool underwater submarine, and he had a really interesting way of swimming. And when you were a kid, when I was a kid growing up, every kid tried to swim like the Man from Atlantis. It didn't really work as well as it looked on TV. But, yeah, I mean, I would think, again, I've always said that in terms of pop culture, every 20 years, it kind of 20 years, once something's 20 years old, it starts to fall away. Its pop culture memory diminishes. And now, as I get older, I mean, one of the things that I joke about being old, like with one foot in their graves, but a lot of what I think happened to me recently, especially people that I work with, maybe I was viewed, my age was viewed as sort of being odd. It's something I never think about because I don't pay much attention to that. And when I was a kid, I had so many much older friends, and then I've interacted with people that are much younger than me a lot of the time. I don't pay much attention to that, but I think that there are people that do, and I think part of the problem that I have with them is that. But it also is with genre fans. I mean, if you've been around long enough, if you were there to see Star Wars first run, and I use that as the demarcation point because literally the imagination connoisseur world changed after Star Wars came out. The box office success of Star Wars made science fiction, fantasy, and horror, the entire genre of the cinefantastique, more respectable. And if you watch what happened, I mean, Superman the movie made a lot of money. Alien made a lot of money. Star Trek the motion picture made a lot of money. They didn't think any of these things, there was not a level of respectability. So when there were science fiction shows on in the 70s, whether it was the Logan's Run TV series based on the movie, whether it was shows like The Fantastic Journey that lasted, what? I don't know, 8 episodes or something. And you had shows like Man from Atlantis, and there was lots of other strange little science fiction shows that wouldn't last very long. Science fiction was not a viable, after Star Trek went off the air, there was nothing in the 70s that really could have replaced Star Trek. I mean, there was Jerry Anderson shows like Space 1999, that lasted 2 seasons. But yeah, kids today, if you weren't watching Man from Atlantis when you were a kid then, I mean, it's not the kind of show that you would be like, I'm gonna go back. It's not like The Prisoner or UFO or The Twilight Zone or Outer Limits that you can go back and look at now that sort of has historical value. Not to put down the Man from Atlantis or anybody who was involved with the making of that show, but you know, it's not exactly burning up the pop culture memory circuits. But yeah, I watched it. I watched it. So Darren, thanks for that. John Ortiz sends in a tip and says, "Hey Rob, you gotta love StarTrek.com. Another great article. I'll just mention the title. 7 of 9 was always queer. As Stan Lee always said, 'nuff said.' Or, as the snooty waiter in Ferris Bueller's Day Off said, 'I weep for the future. You're Abe Froman, the sausage king of Chicago.'" Yep, that's me. Really? 7 of 9 was always queer. That's such a strange thing. Yeah, what an odd thing. Jeremy Tishabasu sends in a super chat and says, "Did you know the lighthouse in the lighthouse was built from scratch? It was built on Nova Scotia's Cape Forshue on volcanic rock. Eggers had a specific vision for the lighthouse but couldn't actually find one that he was looking for from the script. Credit to Will Bryan on Cora." I'd heard that. I wanted to see, I mean, I know they built some sets. I saw a little featurette on it, but I didn't know that they built the entire lighthouse, which makes sense because if you want to shoot on something, it's always best to construct it so you can control it and you can have wild walls if you need those. But I didn't know that. That's interesting. Our man Koba is here and says, "With all the time off work due to the virus closing it down, I rewatched the entire Stargate series. The movie was a fun ride, but SG-1, Atlantis, and Universe are fantastic science fiction. Every time someone brings up these shows, I have to admit it is a big, gaping black hole in my imagination connoisseurship. I need to sit down and watch Stargate and watch the whole thing. I like the movie a lot, but I don't know anything about the series, so I really need to get on that, Koba. It's something I need to do." Vlad Momot sends in a super chat and says, "I shared a ward at a clinic with a bandit, a farmer, and a refugee. Man of Steel was on TV. They watched and said, 'Always hated these cheap USA-made fairy tales from Hollywood, but damn, that was good.' Well, I love that. I shared a ward at the clinic with a bandit, a farmer, and a refugee. That's like either the beginning of a joke or an awesome Tarantino movie in itself. But it's nice to know that that people like. Look, John Campy and I are always banging on about how we like Man of Steel. I love Man of Steel. I love the take on it. It's a different take on Superman. It's more of a realistic take. What would happen if a Kryptonian landed on the planet now? What would happen if 2 Kryptonians battled over a city? It wouldn't be so much like Superman 2. It would be a lot more like what happened in Man of Steel. So, yeah. Uche Noir, let me see. Uche, I think it's Uche. Nawari? Send a super chat. Uche, another great name. Thank you for that. Very much appreciated. Vlad Momont also goes on and says, "Have you heard of the Orch-Or theory of consciousness? Exciting stuff. If it proves to be true, our souls are quantum clouds closer to music than a program." Look, I believe that's absolutely could be. We don't understand consciousness, so I do not. But that sounds good to me. I would like that to be true. Kendiana Jones is here and says, Rob, are you familiar with Canadian director Bruce McDonald's road movie Highway 61? I am familiar with it, but I have not seen it. If you or Elizabeth are not, may I recommend it for a future Elizaviews whining about the movies? And no, it's not a bad movie night idea. It's actually a cool and odd film. I think you might dig it. Yeah. Didn't Bruce McDonald, didn't he direct Pontypool? I will absolutely watch that. Brendan Sheehy sends in a super chat and says, have you seen Climax directed by Gaspar Noé? Yes. As a matter of fact, I own Climax on Blu-ray. It's a very interesting film, and I didn't love it, though. To be honest, I bought the movie sight unseen because Enter the Void was one of the movies that in my entire life, as soon as it was over, I mean, Irreversible remains to this day. There's a scene in that film that I have not been able to get through. And for anyone who knows Irreversible, there's some hideous violence in that movie, but there's a rape scene in that movie I've never been able to sit through the whole thing. So Gaspar Noé is definitely an agent provocateur, an enfant terrible, as it were. But I did like Climax. I didn't love Climax. But Enter the Void is an amazing, amazing movie. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, I've consciously stayed away from Prometheus and Covenant. I don't want to diminish Alien, even though they're canonical. I don't want to know if the ship only transported eggs in Alien or if there was a queen waiting around the corner that they never saw. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I know. Word Balloon. John Suttress is here for the Word Balloon podcast. FYI, Ridley Scott hosted a TV show on the science fiction channel, Prophets of Science Fiction. I'm on 3 episodes about Jules Verne, Asimov, and George Lucas. I did not know that. I need to watch that. For those of you who might not know John, the Word Balloon podcast is a great pop culture podcast, and during these sheltering at home, he's been killing it with his live chats with people. Really, really interesting. You got to seek that out. Rob Korzak sent in a super chat and says, it finally occurred to me how to describe Star Trek. It's a procedural of a future yet to come. Thoughts? I love that idea. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great idea. I really do. Lancelot Narayan says, are you okay? You don't seem yourself. I am okay. No, I'm good. I'm a little tired, to be honest, today. But yeah, I'm pretty good. Pretty good. Lancelot Narayan sends in another tip and says, speaking of the man from Atlantis, do you remember the Gemini Man with Ben Murphy? He had a special watch that made him invisible. I have the whole series. It's great fun. I remember that show. Again, I did not watch that show. Regis says, hi, Rob. I've noticed the Discovery one in 2001, A Space Odyssey, is shaped like a sperm. And in the end, we have a gigantic cosmic baby. How about that? Yeah, people have brought that up occasionally. But I do like that. Although, I guess with the pod leaving that sperm, what if the Discovery is actually a phallus and the pod is actually the sperm? So Dave Bowman in his sperm goes and impregnates the universe or something like that. I like that. Why not? Stubble McShave sends in a tip and said, I watched the special features on Shogun. For those of you who don't know, Shogun is one of my favorite things that's ever been broadcast on TV. The television miniseries. It's so good. I watched the special features on Shogun. The movie culture clashes between Hollywood and Japan was fascinating. The Japanese crew didn't build sets. They built whole villages with complete houses. God love them. If you guys haven't seen, if you're a Star Trek fan or you like science fiction and you don't necessarily like historical dramas, I still suggest going back and watching Shogun, because one of the great joys, it's based on James Clavell's novel, but one of the great joys of Shogun is that you, through the eyes of Richard Chamberlain, Blackthorne, you have to learn Japanese culture and language through what goes on. A lot of it is not subtitled, and it's fascinating. When I was a kid, I couldn't get enough of it. I think it aired in 1980, so I was, 13? Amazing, amazing stuff. So I cannot recommend Shogun highly enough. Now I'm going to jump over to letters, because I have a lot of them. This first one comes from Hugh Brown. Hugh says, "Hi Rob, I've meant to write to you for a long time. I have many half-baked letters which did not reach the oven of publication. Like many of the imagination connoisseurs, I wanted to write to you to express my support and appreciation for what you do. I first discovered you on the John Campea show over a year and a half ago. Several things that struck me about you was your openness, your humanity, wicked and cheeky sense of humor and fun, so I followed you to your channel. As an imagination connoisseur, I've appreciated you and the rest of the Post-Geek Singularity community. I've come late to YouTube and social media as my cursory exploration of it in the beginning led me to retreat. What I've found on your channel so refreshing is you've made a point welcoming everyone and wanting to build communities across the network with diverse views, but shared love of material. Having made a short film myself, I've valued your considerable knowledge and expertise in making movies and the entertainment business generally. Your show has gotten me through many a day, making me smile, laugh, and even think. I've enjoyed the contributions of other Imagination Connoisseur members in their letters and the sharing of ideas and thoughts. I, as an Afro-Caribbean man born in the UK, have watched with anger and sadness at the events happening in the US and here in the UK in a slightly different context. It made me reflect on a series I watched a few months ago on the BBC. I don't know if you've watched it, but if you haven't, please watch Noughts and Crosses. Oh my God, I have heard so much about this show. I don't think it's available in the United States. Noughts and Crosses, the TV series on the BBC based on Mallory Blackman's novels that came out early this year, set in an alternate reality in which history has been flipped and white European countries were colonized by Africa. Yeah, the series is about like 700 years ago, Africa conquered Europe and colonized it. The series is set in the capital of Albion, London, in which white people, or Knots, known pejoratively as blankers, are the underclass, and black people, the crosses, are in the ruling elite. The series has much to say about the current events we are living in. It certainly resonated with me, while its highlighting of discrimination through the drip of everyday infractions affecting the Knots. In this world, it's black people who populate government, who present and report television news, who attend university lectures and enjoy black privilege. It is here white people who don't get plasters to match their skin color and whose names are mispronounced are told they're lazy troublemakers. Other inequalities like police violence against the Knots draw parallels with my experiences in the real world. I watched the series with 2 points of view. What the world could look like, in the words of Eric Killmonger, if we were on top. Our history and culture celebrated and dominating everywhere. I also identify with the Knots, as their struggle is my struggle in the real world. Watching, no matter who you are, will give a different perspective and maybe some insights into other points of view, and this is what good science fiction can do. It reinforced the point that no matter who is doing the oppressing, it's wrong. But I don't know what it would take, as the Mother of Dragon puts it, to break the wheels, without us all going up in flames. I wanted to say something further about your tweet. The tweet was disappointing because it so did not represent you or what you were trying to say. We all have a Pon farr moment, and to paraphrase Star Trek, of all the souls I have met on the internet, yours, dear Rob, is the most human. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Again, I've apologized for that, and one of the things I didn't really quite get is my words were connected to a video. And if you hadn't seen the video, my words seem very unhinged, to say the least. But, I was specifically referring to Captain David Dorn, a man it was a video of him dying alone on the sidewalk. And I was referring specifically to that particular incident. But once I took that tweet down, it was then screen capped, and just my words were shared without the video. And while my words didn't change, they were completely without context if you hadn't seen my tweet was a response. I wasn't making a statement in general. And a lot of people mistook that, like I should, are you saying shoot looters? No. And at first I didn't really understand why people were saying that. I'm like, did you not watch the video? Well, people didn't watch the video. And now we learned that now Captain Duke, Captain Dorn's assailant was actually there specifically. It was a group of 6 guys that came to specifically rob that pawn shop. They weren't looting. They weren't protesting. They weren't rioting. They were armed robbers who went specifically under the cover of those things to rob a store. And I'll leave it up to you to why would anybody rob a pawn shop? And this guy, they're just, if you know pawn shops, there's things in pawn shops that can be desirable if you are, say, a criminal of any kind, mostly guns. I'm not saying that that's what they were going to get. They already had guns, but, easily sold. I don't know. But it was clear to me that what happened to him was not rioting and looting or something else. And so when I made mention of the Second Amendment, you're always hearing how guns are used. I need a gun to defend myself, defend my home, defend what I had. And my anger was there was no Second Amendment. There was nobody around with a gun that could have saved him. And, I still, when I read about Captain Dorn, I found out he has 5 kids and he had 10 grandchildren. And he had 10 grandchildren. His grandchildren are still there. My grandfather lived to be 97 years old, and he was leading a vibrant life until the week he passed away. And I was the only one with him of our family because everyone was out of state. I was sitting with him and holding his hand the moment that he died, the moment that he flatlined. And that was, I just, seeing this man, he wasn't obviously as old as my grandfather. He was 77. But I just kept thinking, if he lived like my grandfather did, he would have had 20 more years. And those 10 grandkids weren't there. Nobody was there to hold his hand. And that's what made me angry. But once that tweet was taken out of context, I think my meaning was misconstrued. And that's why a lot of people got so angry with me, and rightfully so. I should not have used those words, especially in this time. So I regretted that. For me, other imagination connoisseur members or anybody who follows you casually will know that your heart was in the right place as you spoke about the injustices that are affecting us in the world, and I've always been an advocate for equality. The words in the tweet were expressed poorly, and I think seeing your words alone without a broader context and how it came across, you were right to apologize. Yeah, I'm glad you feel that way, because I did need to apologize. Still, it does make me angry that some people wish to misrepresent you and make you into something you actually aren't. Alt-right, a racist, really? Maybe you are in the mirror universe, but in this one I think not. And don't get me going on those individuals trying to cancel you. If people want to hold one tweet against you but don't look at the person you have demonstrated yourself to be, well then it's their opinions that are worthless. I myself will continue to watch and support you. I'll write another letter, but for now I just want to sign and say, keep building communities across the network. When you make it to London, I look forward to meeting you and having a drink or 3. Best regards, Hugh. Well, Hugh, I very much appreciate that. For those of you who think that knots and crosses sound interesting and have never heard of it before, here's a really interesting 4-minute behind the scenes featurette. The show is actually shot in South Africa, and so there I put it in the live chat. It looks really interesting. I mean, I love alternate histories and parallel worlds and all that. And I got to thinking, I don't know if this show, anything like this could have ever been made in America. But it really looks great. So I'm very much interested in seeing this show. Can't wait to see it. This next letter comes from Noah DeGarmo. Hello, Rob. Amidst our growing cultural and political divisions in these tumultuous times, I'd like to share with you a personal story that speaks to the unifying power of film. In fall of 2019, I began my first official year of college, and at orientation, I heard 2 guys behind me talking about Bernie Sanders. I responded by turning around and cracking a lighthearted joke about the then presidential candidate. It was a lame joke, but it allowed me to introduce myself to a new person. I saw him again at an event later that week. We sat down and conversed over hot dogs and soda. Considering how we initially met, we talked about politics. I learned that he is a far-left socialist Marxist. I, on the other hand, am a staunch right-wing libertarian. This might be a shock to hear in contemporary America, but our political division caused no personal division. We both respected each other's views, and as we continued talking, we discovered a mutual love of film, television, and comics. I've never really had personal friends that share my passion for movies, hence my love of the online film community. I've certainly never known someone who shares my diverse taste in film, hence my joy when I learned that my new friend shares my love of a wide range of movies, from comic book blockbusters to artsy dramas. One night we talked for hours discussing the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films versus the MCU's interpretation of the character. Another night we got together and watched Bergman's Through a Glass Darkly. Wow. To this day we're great friends. Even being in different states, we've stayed connected throughout the lockdown, texting about movies frequently. Our politics could not be more different, but despite this fact, we've built a fantastic friendship on the foundations of our mutual love of film. Thank you, Rob, for bringing this same spirit of unification to the all too often divisive world of online movie discussion. Your channel and John Campia's are some of the few where everyone is welcome, regardless of their politics, to bond over our love of movies. I hope your recent issues are resolved the best they can be, and I wish you the best. Thank you. Well, Noah, I want to thank you for that very nice letter. Yeah, I mean, that's the funny thing, being branded something that I'm clearly not, which is on full display each and every day. This would be the 437th time. It's been gratifying to at least see people come back and say, you're not a right-winger, you're not a gun nut, you're not a racist. Look, I'm still getting people sending me really nasty messages and emails. Someone called me the ringmaster of racism and asked me why didn't I have a Klan rally to go to, and I'm like, I don't take it personally, or they've been very insulting to Elizabeth and myself, which I'm like, okay, that's fine. But if you're fighting for injustice and you believe that I'm bringing injustice into the world, why you have to do it in such a douchebag? Why be a douchebag? Especially when I've opened up this forum for anybody to send me a letter if they want to take me to task or anything, they can. And I've also, I'm glad you pointed out, like, I'm always trying to figure out, just like the letter said, most people, if you can find something to bond with people over, I tend to use pop culture whenever I go someplace new. If I'm in Australia, I talked a lot about the Australian bands, like INXS or Midnight Oil, and talking about Midnight Oil always opened a conversation because the lead singer, Peter Garrett, went into politics, and everybody in Australia has an opinion about that. So I always have tried to use pop culture to foster discussion with people I don't know. And for the most part, it works. And that's why I enjoy going to other people's channels that I might not politically agree with. And it's been very interesting to watch the response that I've received from people that I wouldn't necessarily normally agree with politically, because I've always been very supportive of them for what they do, and their channels and things like that. And so people have criticized me for that. And I'm not going to stop reaching out to people and going on people's channels and things like that, because why would I do that? I like hearing from other people. I like listening to other people's points of view. Let's see. This one comes from Justin. Hey, Rob. While I have been a part of the Post-Geek Singularity for quite some time now, this is the first time I have found the courage to write you. It's admittedly not the first letter I had in mind to send, but in light of recent events, I would be remiss not to express what makes your channel so special to me. I have been an imagination connoisseur for all of my life, 31 years to be exact. And while I won't bore you with the nuances of my own origin story, I will give a brief description of who I am for context. I'm a comic artist, writer, cinephile, and a black man. Rob, you are the exception to the rule. Your open and non-judgmental discussion-based videos are a welcome change of pace to what most channels offer. When you say you have many fans who call your channel one of the most inclusive, I am definitely one of those voices. Since both Robservations and Elizaviews, oh, thank you for that, Elizabeth would love to hear that, are on my daily rotation, I felt compelled to explain why your content stands apart. Currently, there is a massive disconnect between fans and creators. We see the pendulum swinging so far into the opposite direction, trying to make up for decades of bad practices and lack of inclusion, that studios and publishers are alienating the core fan base of major franchises. This disconnect has led to the modern incarnation of the fandom menace, a relic of the past resurrected by social media discourse. Let's be honest, a lot of the pundits in the YouTube fandom breed a heavy atmosphere of negativity. This seems to be the result of one of two factors. One, the content creators themselves directly engaging in the negativity with scathing gotcha titles using buzzwords like woke, agenda, politics, claiming to be apolitical while offering content that proves otherwise. Or the second factor, fans of those channels perpetuating negativity by using the comments section as their own personal battleground. For me, the most egregious thing about the Phantom Menace channels is there seems to be no accountability or responsibility taken when their viewership is infiltrated by sexist and racist comments, both of which barely have a cursory knowledge of the topic that they are offended by, only there to add their voice to an already noisy discussion. So trying to interact with fans in those forums can be very difficult. While the video itself often seems measured in its critique, a simple scroll downward and you're suddenly thrust into the Battle of Wolf 359. Some may simply shrug these comments off as freedom of speech, but as a black man, freedom of speech is often used against me rather than for me. That is where you, Rob, make a difference. Here in the Post-Geek Singularity, we share in our differing views of entertainment without malice. We celebrate the industry that has given us so much joy while still remaining constructive and respectful in our criticism. You have set the example for this, whether it's dismantling Picard for its incongruity or simply reading letters from those that don't share your personal politics. You are the embodiment of class and verisimilitude, and that is why your channel stands apart. The Justin, I love it. It's Justn, Justin. P.S. My next letter will not be a downer. I plan on talking about kaiju. Laugh out loud. Well, I didn't think your letter was a downer. I very much appreciate that. It's strange. It's strange to me. One of the things having things like racism leveled at me lately. When I think to myself, that's so. I don't even. It was. I mean, obviously, I understand what racism is, but I personally am like I like all kinds of people, and in my mind, what's really interesting is when I go somewhere and when I meet interesting people and when I meet animals. Like I love animals, and I once told Elizabeth, because we were talking about getting a llama or something and putting a llama in the backyard. And I tried to explain to her once that my love of animals came out of they're the closest I'll ever get to meeting like alien creatures. And so when I meet people like we literally call immigrants to this country, aliens, and I've always loved people because they're people aren't me. And they have different stories to tell, and I've always loved people and the more different they are from me, the better, the more interesting it is. And I've always loved people from all over the place, and as somebody who loves science fiction and fantasy and horror, if you're a science fiction fan and you read a lot of space opera or you read a lot of stuff about the world. I've always looked at the Earth as our planet. Like I've never thought about like, oh, I'm here living in, when I was growing up in Washington State, like these damn immigrants coming to this. I never thought about that. To me, because it's like we live on a planet. I've always thought of people as existing on the Earth, not as I'm existing on this one small part of the Earth and everybody out there around the rest of the planet is other than me. I'm like, no, man, I want to go meet everybody and do everything and see it all. And I've always felt that way. That's why I like having this inclusive channel. I mean, think about it. Like the people that are here right in this chat, there's people from all over the world that come to these chats every day. All over the world. I mean, how cool is that? It's that's like the most amazing things. I like Joseph sent me a drawing of and Vesna. You know, they're amazing, and Willow coming over from being a Chinese immigrant. There's Stubble McShave and there's in Sweden. I mean, Dieter is in Germany. People from Norway, people from all over the world. People have written me from India. It's great, and we're all on the same planet. So that's what I like. I like people. I like all kinds of people from all different places, and as long as they're respectful to me, I will be respectful to them, and respectful to this community as a whole. Omar94 is here. Hello, Omar. Hi, Rob. I mentioned in a previous letter that I love reading film scripts. I told you about Sam Hamm's original Batman script and one of the scripts for The Last Action Hero, which William Goldman script doctored after Shane Black worked on it. However, there were some other scripts I forgot to tell you about, so here they are. I have read J.J. Abrams' Superman flyby script. It would have been divisive if made, as Abrams took a lot of liberties with the source material. In the script, Krypton did not explode. Jor-El was the planet's king instead of a scientist. Jor-El chose the Kents to raise his son. The villain was an original character called Tyzor, who was Superman's cousin. He was essentially General Zod, and Lex Luthor was revealed to be Kryptonian. Despite the creative liberties, I actually quite liked the script. It's not perfect, as I thought the love story with Lois Lane was rushed. How Superman defeats Tyzor and other Kryptonians was also rushed, and I didn't like Lex being Kryptonian. I also read an earlier draft of Ghostbusters 2. I was able to visualize the script based on what I remember from the movie, like the actors, settings, etc. But for the new material, I had to come up with that stuff myself. While it has certain similarities to the final film, I actually like this script a lot, and I think it would have been better than what we got. I don't dislike Ghostbusters 2 like you do. I think it's just okay. It's not as good as the first film, but I think it's watchable and in some parts entertaining. The main differences are Slimer and Janosz Poha not being in it, and the river of slime was replaced with a horde of insects. Dana was also not in it, and it was replaced by a woman called Lane Walker, who still had a baby the bad guy was interested in. Walter Peck appears for a short time. Vigo was called Jason Clarke and had a relationship with Lane Turner and was the baby's father. The Statue of Liberty was used by Vigo to fight the Ghostbusters instead of the other way around, like in the movie. Louis Tully would have put on a suit and joined the final battle. It's not perfect, as Janine and Winston got sidelined again, but I still like it better than the final film, and I don't dislike the final film. The most recent script I read was Shane Black's original Last Boy Scout script, which I have read. I thought the final film was just okay, me too, so I was really looking forward to reading the original script, since both Black and the film's director Tony Scott said the original script was far better than the final film. Yes, it was. Holy crap, it certainly was. Like I did with earlier Ghostbusters 2 script, I visualized Last Boy Scout's original script based on what I remember from the movie, like the actors, settings, etc., and came up with visuals for the new material the movie didn't have. The final film had some similarities to the original script, but didn't work as well. The original script actually had a more focused story, more compelling protagonists, more menacing villains, and some really cool action sequences. Joe Hallenbeck and Jimmy Dix are actually better fleshed out. The reconciliation between Joe and his wife was much stronger. Milo was far more menacing, and there were really amazing action sequences in the third act involving boats and yachts. I don't know what Joel Silver and Bruce Willis were thinking when they kept demanding changes, and Black had to do so many rewrites. If this original script was made, I think Last Boy Scout could have been in the discussion of being one of the best action movies ever. I agree with you. One interesting piece of trivia, Tony Scott hated Joel Silver so much from The Last Boy Scout, he made sure when making True Romance, Lee Donowitz acted and sounded exactly like Joel Silver. Yep. I'll send another letter eventually about scripts I've read that are either unmade or earlier drafts of scripts that became movies. It's always really fun and interesting to see the process from the printed page to the big screen. Thanks, and live long and prosper. Yeah, I read that when Shane Black's Last Boy Scout script came out. It was I think it sold for $1.75 million and became, at the time, the biggest spec script sale ever. So, and I was at Warner Brothers. I was working at Warner Brothers in feature production at the time, so I want to say that the script came to us. Anyway, I read it very soon after it was available, and I loved the script and was really disappointed in the movie. So yeah. Now this actually is a letter for Elizaviews that I'm going to save for then, which is great. And you know what? You know who I have a letter from? Let me find it. Let's see where it is. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Willow Yang. That's correct. Willow Yang has sent me a letter, and it is a doozy. So I'm going to, it's going to be me reading it, but I'm going to, I wish I could do Willow's cute voice. She has a great voice, and one day it is my hope that she will come on this show and have a discussion or make a video. And I would love to hear her read one of these letters in her voice. But barring that, I know I'm putting her on the spot. I'm sorry, Willow. It's just my dream. Greetings, Rob. Going back to talking about Star Trek, I'm writing to discuss 2 episodes that dealt with the issues of bigotry and oppression. The Next Generation's The Outcast and the original series Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. A while back, when I was in the 11th grade, there was a student film festival that featured various shorts and public service announcements made by my classmates. Of course, none of them were particularly good, but they were still fun to watch. One of the PSAs was made by a group that was headed by my classmate John, whom I've mentioned before in my past letters. The subject matter of his PSA was about homophobia, and the video depicted a society where homosexuality was the norm and heterosexuals get beaten up. Of course, I got a real kick out of seeing my classmates acting as gay couples and doing romantic things like feeding each other Skittles. Aw, I bet you like that. After having watched, as you've expressed before, I love that about you. After having watched The Outcast, however, and knowing that John was a fan of Star Trek, the only fan that I knew at the time, I cannot help but wonder if he might have gotten the whole idea from that episode. The Outcast, for me, felt a little bit reminiscent of Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, in the way that it attempted to address the outstanding issues of prejudice and discrimination in our society. In both cases, we are presented with an alien race who has prejudices that we find to be ludicrous, and that is meant to reflect back onto us how idiotic our own prejudices are. Let That Be Your Last Battlefield presented the Charon, which, to be honest, just reminded me of those New York black and white cookies from Seinfeld, which, of course, was also used as a symbol for racial harmony in that show. We find out that apparently in their society, those that are black on the right side of the face were considered superior compared to those that are black on the left side, even though to our eyes, they look the same. Hence, this becomes a reflection of our own racial prejudices and just how illogical and nonsensical it is for us to discriminate against people based on their skin color. The Outcast did a similar thing by presenting us with a society where the majority of its people are androgynous and essentially engage in same-sex relationships, whereas the minority in that society lean towards either a male or female gender and engage in heterosexual relationships, are considered deviants and subjected to violence and derision. This, of course, is meant to comment on the follies of homophobia in our own society. Another point of similarity between these 2 episodes is that they both presented tragic outcomes. Let That Be Your Last Battlefield revealed the destruction of the entire Charon race. The Outcast had its titular character, Soren, being forced to undergo conversion therapy. I found the endings of both to be haunting and impactful. They were warnings to us of the repercussions of our prejudices. Let That Be Your Last Battlefield showing us what could happen to our own world if we do not learn to overcome our fear and hatred for one another. The Outcast showing us the more personal suffering of what a marginalized individual The Outcast showing us the more personal suffering of a marginalized individual and asking us whether we want to be like the antagonists in that story. Watching those 2 episodes now, I do think that they may be a bit dated in how they approach their subject matter. Let That Be Your Last Battlefield is often criticized for being too heavy-handed with its message, although the issues of racial hatred and inequality remain highly relevant given the ongoing events in America and across the world. The Outcast, on the other hand, is often criticized for not going far enough in its exploration of sexuality, although I do think the episode actually works much better nowadays as a metaphor for gender identity and the struggles of transgender people. These two episodes might not hold up as well as stories dealing with the more timeless themes like Balance of Terror or Tapestry. Nonetheless, I do feel that when considering the historical context under which these were made, these episodes are still important. I wasn't alive during the 60s, but considering that an interracial kiss between William Shatner and Nichelle Nichols in Plato's Stepchildren was controversial when it first aired, having a story like Let That Be Your Last Battlefield was probably important for its time. I was several months away from being born when The Outcast first aired. I remember, however, being in high school when Brokeback Mountain came out and seeing quite a few people at the time still being uncomfortable about the movie's subject matter. Sure, The Outcast may have played it safe by today's standards, but I do think that the episode was probably considered daring during the early 90s. Finally, I do think the fact that those two episodes may have now become dated can only be seen as a positive testament to the progress that our society has made. Perhaps great art should be able to stand on its own without the need for contextualization. But I don't think that diminishes the importance of stories that have pushed boundaries and went up against norms during their time. The fact that exploring racial or LGBTQ issues is no longer considered controversial, no longer considered ahead of its time, well, that can only be seen as a good thing. Live long and prosper, Willow. Well, Willow, another great article, or another great letter. You always brighten my day. Now, for those of you who don't remember, the Outcast is indeed, in that episode, they go to a society, and Riker falls in love with a member of that society who has female leanings. Now, a lot of people, and I've talked to friends of mine, LGBTQ friends, and we've been going back and forth, man, about this episode. Well, since it aired, pretty much. And one of the things that has always been an objection about that episode is that if they wanted to really be ballsy, the actor that is in that role that Riker falls in love with, people feel that they should have cast a man in that role. And I don't disagree with that, but it never would have been made. At the time, you know, Star Trek was always best as an allegory and dealing with these kinds of issues, coming right out and doing a straight up show about same-sex love or gender identity, dysmorphia, whatever you want to call it, was something the TV was not doing. And I've always thought that was a pretty ballsy episode. So in the episode, you know, this is a genderless, supposed to be a genderless society, and you don't have feelings about one way or another for people that you don't feel more like a woman and have feelings for a masculine person. And Riker falls in love with one of these people who feels that she is more of a woman than what her society normally is, and they carry on this affair. They have an affair. And then at the end of the episode, what's really terrible is she does undergo conversion therapy, and everything that she was and everything that she believed in is taken away from her. And I think it's a terrific episode of Star Trek. And like Willow so astutely pointed out, now it's become as much, rather than just being about homosexuality, it's now become more. It's about gender identity problems or issues. And you know what I thought was very interesting. I mean, obviously, for those of you who have been following what's been going on with J.K. Rowling, I've always believed that those issues are natural. They're built into you. They're as much a part of you as everything else. And you know, we're coming around, I think, to those conclusions. But I think that once it's understood, like this is the way you were made, you know, and we just, up until now, we haven't been able to deal with that socially, culturally. But look at the strides that have been made. Who would have thought same-sex marriage would be a part of the law of the land now? And I think it can only be a good thing. I mean, human beings are very diverse, wondrous creatures, and you know, we've had to endure. I mean, no one's better at inflicting pain on mankind than other human beings. So anything that we can do to progress and sort of stay away from that, as we're seeing now, let's hope that there's more of that. And I think, you know, that's why I'm optimistic. I think that we're doing pretty good. I mean, I think so. Let's see. Oh, that's an invitation. I'll read this anyway. I love this. So this comes from Figure Action. Hello, Rob. This is Joe from the Figure Action Podcast. I've been a viewer for a while on the Burnettwork and the John Campea Show, and notice how often you refer to your collection of geek-related toys and statues. Our podcast focuses on toy collecting, ranging from retail Transformers and action figures to high-end collectibles like Hot Toys. I'd like to invite you on our podcast if you are interested in sharing more of your collection and discussing it in greater detail. I understand why you don't on your show, as it may not be for some of your regular viewers, so I thought you might like a chance to spend some time with like-minded geeks and talk about sweet, sweet plastic. When it comes to movies, comics, and TV, we all feel the need to acquire that physical representation of the characters we love and have become addicted to. In other words, I think we're both docking in the same shuttle bay. Feel free to search us on YouTube, and if you're interested, we'd love to have you on. Thank you, and Godspeed. Well, Joe, twist my arm. You want me to come onto a podcast and talk about action figures and collectibles? I don't think I'd be at all interested in that. Of course, sign me up. You know what? I'm going to put this over to the side, and I will absolutely find you, because that sounds, my friend, delightful to me. So yes, sign me up. Can't wait. Let's see what this is. This comes from Adam Blue. Hey, Rob. Do you think if The Force Awakens was to be released around this time, would Disney have edited down Finn's appearance on the Chinese movie poster? There seems to be a lot wrong with that. One part is appeasing Chinese pressure, considering what the current conversation is, whether it's the Hong Kong protests or the coronavirus response, and also doing injustice to Finn on the poster as a black man. It seems like Disney is willing to fit whatever they need to wherever the narrative works best. I know that sounds bad, but we're seeing how easy it is for society to fracture when most of our stock as a country is put into corporations. I think companies like Disney, with the amount of resources that trickle up to them, and considering regulations passed that help give corporations more foothold into the narratives of society, should be doing more. It reminds me of the video game industry. Shortly after the Xbox 360 launched, mid-tier games and developers disappeared because the AAA games made the most money. It wasn't until the crowdfunding mentality that the video game industry leveraged that brought back non-corporate games directly by fans putting their money where their mouth was. This is the same thing with Patreon. The nature of Disney's business, down to appeasing whole economies to maximize profit, obviously can't last long as society evolves. You can say there's a difference between movies in a theater and video games being played at home, but we all know arcades aren't like what they used to be, and the tools are right there for enthusiasts to make mid-tier games at home for free. Anyway, this turned into a rant about many ideas, but what it boils down to is corporations getting away with things that leave the country where it is in a time of crisis, compromising the art that is put out for all to consume. Hopefully my concern was clear. Thanks for reading. Well, Adam, yeah, I think it absolutely is. I mean, again, we certainly don't corner the market on racism. I mean, travel around the world, you can find somebody hates somebody else everywhere you go, or is racist against some other group of people. Honestly, I do think corporations should. Making money is great, but at the end of the day, you're making money off society, and I do think corporations should have standards and practices and stand up for beliefs, especially when it's Disney. And you know, I get it. China is a massive market, and we're talking millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. I get it. I understand that. So in Disney's mind, they're like, okay, let's take Finn off the poster so we can do better business in China. I mean, this is an economic reality that must be, you know, for Disney's a publicly held company. How could a company tell its shareholders, one, that, hey, we're not going to do what we can to make the most amount of money? And, you know, look, if it were up to me, I'd say, why would you do that? You know, Finn's John Boyega is as much a part of this movie as anybody else. And it's strange to me that Disney would have to censor a film that or censor the advertising for. I would just say, well, I guess we can't put, you know, a Wookiee on this either. I mean, we can't put an alien creature. We can't do, where do you draw the line? What I would do is, I think a movie should just be marketed the way you choose to market it. Now, I understand you have to tailor an ad campaign to a certain country, but I also think that we also have to be building a better world at the same time. We can make money and we can still take a stand. That's how I would think. But in a perfect world, how do you explain that to shareholders? I mean, or, why not put that out to your shareholders? Say, look, here's what the Chinese expect from their markets. Here's concerns we have about how do we market this product. And if we're going to market it effectively because of the way China is, we might have to do certain things. Put it out to their shareholders and let people decide. If people want real change, they've got to make it happen. They've got to take it. They got to take responsibility. But there's no way. I'm sorry. That's a perfect world. I mean, as much as I would like the world to be perfect, I mean, we still got companies that will pollute our groundwater to maximize their profit. And with that, we live in this crazy world. My belief is that we should always be making the world a better place because you keep your consumer base more enlightened. You keep them happier. Why would you ever do something to diminish that? But it's a tough call. I would like to see that if somebody said change your ad campaign because one of the principal actors on the movie is because of his race is going to hamper the sales of the film in China, I would like to say to anyone, well, F you. I'm not changing it. John Boyega, he put in all this time to be in all three movies. Why would you ever want to diminish him? But then again, I mean, look what they did to Rose Tico in Rise of Skywalker. That had nothing to do with the ad campaign. It had to do, I don't know what. I mean, why would you want to marginalize a Vietnamese person? Diminish her character. It's very weird. But look, my whole thing is, we all live on this planet. Why don't we all just help each other out and don't do those kinds of things and don't diminish people? Because you know what? I think if Disney gave posters to the Chinese, they would. What are they going to do? It's like, here's our ad campaign. Here you go. I mean, I know the Chinese distributors do their own artwork too, but you can't just take a stand when people are rising up. You have to always have a stand. You have to always stand for the same things. Otherwise, don't pretend. Pablo Contreras is here. Greetings from Mexico City, Rob. I'm writing to you as a brand new diehard member of the Post-Geek Singularity, as mentioned in my previous letter. I also find this letter writing business to be rather daunting, seeing the witty, smart letters that are sent by some of the members of the Post-Geek Singularity, but I still felt I needed to write to you. What I find most refreshing about your show is how you present things that are rather new to me. Honestly, I can say that I know about 40% or less of the obscure sci-fi shows, books, and comics that you even talk about on Robservations, and have actually watched or read fewer than that. While I hope that this doesn't make me any less of an imagination connoisseur, no, I would say actually just the contrary. I love it if I can bring things that people haven't seen or heard of. Love singing the gospel of all of the things that we can be imagination connoisseurs of. I enjoy constantly learning new things, and I also find myself adding more shows, movies, etc. to my watch list on every episode of your show. I can only blame my lack of sci-fi and comic book knowledge on my young age, and have not watched anything besides constant repeats of Revenge of the Sith since my mother gave the complete saga to me to play on my portable DVD when I was young. It feels as if in every episode of Robservations, our cool, geeky teacher gives us a quick lesson and presents us with an interesting article or story to discuss, and then answers our questions. I love that you say that. Listens to our thoughts on movies, TV shows, comics, and tells fun stories about how you went to jail at one time, or fun stories of your time in Bulgaria filming The Hills Run Red, which, if members of the Post-Geek Singularity didn't know, is now available on Blu-ray. You're welcome for the plug. And you know what? Let me just tell you. Pablo, since you brought that up, ladies and gentlemen, a week from today, that's right, a film that I developed and produced, The Hills Run Red, comes out on Blu-ray from Scream Factory, Shout Factory. You can go to their website at shoutfactory.com, or You can just order it from Amazon right now. Some people are sending me pictures about how they've got the disc already. So maybe it came out early. I don't know. But it's a grim, bloody, nasty little piece of work. It's short. It's only 81 minutes, but you can get it now and watch all the 6.5 hours of new special features, and I hope you'll dig it. Now back to Pablo. Thanks, Pablo, for setting me up for a commercial break. I wanted to share and get your thoughts on 2 action-adventure fantasy series that left a lasting impact on me since I was very young, one of which I'm sure you'll be very familiar with. I vividly remember watching The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe when I was 5 or 6, a little after its release, because my parents thought I was too young to watch it. I remember being transported into this world the second Georgie Henley, as Lucy Pevensie, walked out of that mysterious wardrobe. This movie introduced me to the fantasy genre that I feel is no longer aimed towards the younger generations, with titles such as Game of Thrones and The Witcher being aimed to more older demographics. I also remember being frightened by the war sequences at the beginning of the film, just as I was frightened and intrigued by James McAvoy's Mr. Tumnus character and his songs. I also vividly remember getting chills all around my body in the final battle where Peter screams the words "For Narnia" and Aslan as they charge into battle. The rest of the entries I felt were also good, but both expanding on the established characters and lore to the point where you could really see an evolution to all of these characters, from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe to Prince Caspian to Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which I think is rather underrated. All of them are filled with heart, action, and several surprisingly dark moments that I don't know if Disney would let fly nowadays. I don't know if you know this, but as a DVD behind-the-scenes producer, me and my team and I were in New Zealand for the entire production of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. We went all over the North and South Islands of New Zealand and filmed everything. If you get the 4-disc set, all of that behind-the-scenes footage was shot by us. So I was on set. I mean, I went back and forth to the States, but most of my team, somebody from my team, was on set every day of production of that film. And I knew everybody, and it was quite a time. 14 months we were covering the shooting of that movie, and I have tremendous fondness for it. We only worked on Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and it was amazing. The second series I wanted to talk about is the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, which in my mind ends at the 3rd one, and they're all directed by Gore Verbinski. At the age of 6, I remember going to the theaters and watching At World's End, the 3rd one, several times, each being as fun, exciting, and impactful as the last. I love At World's End as a fantasy film, I really do. I understand that now every entry in the franchise after The Curse of the Black Pearl is regarded as too long, boring, or bland, but I chose to believe otherwise. They're also crazy, original, and actually create a mythology and world that feels complex and intriguing. You have to remember these movies were based on a theme park ride and nothing else. Still, Gore Verbinski managed to use old pirate lore and give his own spin in a way I thought was rather remarkable. The score by Hans Zimmer is nothing short of brilliant. The set pieces are crazy, imaginative, and darn fun. The look of the first 3 movies is also incredible, with characters like Davy Jones and his imaginative design paired with top-notch CGI, and in general just a brilliant blend of computer-generated imagery as well as practical sets and props. And even though Johnny Depp gets flack for his portrayal of Jack Sparrow, a lot of people forget he received an Academy Award nomination for his performance. I personally found him annoying at times, but a fun hero to follow. Both these franchises, I thought, introduced a whole generation of young fans into the fantasy action-adventure genre that led me and others to watch Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, and even go back and watch classics like Indiana Jones, etc. However, I believe that today the major studios have shied away from telling original stories in complex worlds and would rather go the safe route, best exemplified, in my opinion, by films such as The Rise of Skywalker, which does not, in my opinion, expand on the mythology and take risks like the criminally underrated prequels did. That's a discussion for another time. But films like that make me nihilistic about the future of the film industry, where studios continue to make the same handful of films over and over and over, taking very little chances in the fantasy genre or original stories in general. Is my fear for the future of Hollywood justified, or am I over-exaggerating? What are your thoughts on the 2 franchises that I brought up? Thank you for taking my letter. It means a lot. And I think what you've built here with the Post-Geek Singularity is really incredible, RMB. You should be immensely proud of this community and all of your work in this space. I mean it. I wish I could end this letter with a witty, deep-cut Star Trek quote, but only having watched a handful of the original films, I don't know any. Something that, after watching a couple of your videos, will surely change. Sending all the love and support to you, Elizabeth, your dogs, and the rest of the Post-Geek Singularity from Mexico City. Pablo. Well, Pablo, what a delightful letter that is. Look, I really remember seeing the Pirates of the Caribbean film, the first one, Curse of the Black Pearl, and I couldn't believe how much I loved it. I mean, it gets a little long, sure, but I loved it. Now, the next two, the second one, it starts slow for me, but I enjoyed it. But I really liked At World's End. The cast, the epic fantasy set pieces, I really liked it a lot. And I think those three films are absolutely terrific. And I think the Narnia films are really good, too. I mean, I loved Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I thought it came out great. But then again, I was biased. It was one of the more fun times I've had in my life, being in New Zealand, working on that film with Dave Parker and Anthony Smedili, and we were. It was a grand time. So yes, I have nothing but love for those films. This one comes from Simon Frog Walterson. The movie. Wait. Oh, it's from Throg. Simon Frog. Okay. This movie was an incredible time back in the 1970s. People forget about drive-in culture. Hearing the people behind us scream when my parents took us to see Grease. I think participation from crowds of fans has eased a bit in these days. Jaws and Star Wars were my films from that era that had a huge impact on me. By the way, that's how he wrote huge, just like I said it. I loved watching the great Spielberg develop as a young filmmaker. As a young child, a divorce, seeing a nuclear family on screen was odd. My experience was my mother, sister, me, grandmother, and grandfather, so I didn't relate. But it always intrigued me. A lot of people forget that the divorce rate by 1980 was only 19 to 20%. I watched this movie 4 times a year. I took my son, who was 10, to see the 40th anniversary because it is a film that should be seen on the big screen. You must be talking about Jaws, right? Yes, because that's what we did, whining about movies. That came from your friend Throg. Well, Throg, thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, look, like I said, I miss the days. I miss the days going down in downtown Seattle, hearing very verbal audiences at the Friday the 13th movies. It was so much fun. I loved it. I mean, normally for certain movies, you don't want to have people participating or talking back to the screen, but in the right place, in the right venue. I mean, I have to tell you, like, the last time, so Larry Cohen, who made, like, It's Alive, began making blaxploitation movies, and he made, like, Black Caesar. He came back and he made Original Gangsters, where he took people like Fred Williamson and Richard Roundtree and Pam Grier, and he made an update of those movies where the old school, literally the OGs, had to come back and put a whooping down on the young gangbangers. This movie came out in the mid-90s. When I went and saw it, I was so excited to see this movie because I love all of those people. I love those actors. And nobody was in the theater. There was like 8 of us, and we're in the Cinerama Dome. And there's a scene where Fred Williamson first appears. He like flies in on a Learjet, and he comes out, and he's like standing framed in the doorway with this big old cigar. And even the people in the theater, we were all there because we had seen Slaughter, and we'd seen Shaft and Superfly, and that's what we were there. And when Fred Williamson showed up, I don't think I've ever heard so much noise in a movie theater before. We were all, the 8 of us that were there, it was the first show. I went by myself. Man, people went bananas. I was like, because you couldn't not do that. And I don't know if that would necessarily fly today, but for us, for the 8 of us that were in that theater, we are now grown adults watching Fred Williamson literally just show up on screen with a cigar in his mouth. And it was like being a kid again, because I love those movies. And I miss that. That was the last. It was that in Pacific Rim I was with some people. We were freaking out in Pacific Rim. I don't think anybody was freaking out as much as we were. But those are the last two movies where, I mean, I miss that. I miss going to a theater where people can participate. But man, I'll tell you, I've never that original Gangsta screening. Oh, that was the best. That was the best. It was, you know, I think all of us who were there too that day were bummed out like there was only 8 of us in the theater. But you know what? I don't know if anyone who's watching this was there that day. You know what I'm talking about. Still one of the best times. One of the best times I ever had in a movie theater. This comes from James M. Hello. Today I would like to ask a question that I've been wondering about on and off for quite a while now. Why do so many movies feel they have to have a villain or a bad guy? Now, if it's a superhero movie, I get it. Although, no, that's a letter for a different day. In general, though, why do so many films feel the need to add a villain? I understand there are many different types of movies and all of them serve a purpose. Some share a true story, some make people think, and others are made to help people escape or forget about the problems and struggles they have in real life. If the movie is based on a true story, I understand the inclusion of a villain. Almost everyone has someone they view as a villain or includes someone as a villain type to illustrate an important part of the story. In a movie created to make people think, here again is a case where a villain is used to illustrate a significant point in the film. And if the villain is written correctly and the movie edited correctly, the bad guy will not feel like a villain, at least not to everyone. The movie made for people to escape or forget about their problems or struggles as they have in real life. This is the kind of movie I really wish there were more of that did not have a villain. Because when a villain appears in movies, it tends to cheapen the film. Usually because this villain, is one straight from a kid's show, by being dumb or over the top. What is the difference between dumb and over the top? I hear someone asks. An over the top villain is like the villain in the first Paddington Bear movie. While a dumb villain is any villain in the Air Bud or Buddies movies. I get your, I see what I totally agree with what you're saying. I know that there have been good movies without villains in each of these categories. In the true story category, there are movies like Dolphin Tale, The Pride of the Yankees, and Titanic. In the make people think category, movies without a villain would include Pollyanna, You Can't Take It With You, and Interstellar. That's a good example. And finally, in the help people escape or forget about problems or struggles they have in real life category would be Ferris Bueller's Day Off, National Lampoon's Vacation Movies, and Rookie of the Year. Yeah, but even Ferris Bueller's Day Off has Ed Rooney, and he's a villain. So there are movies without a villain, but when we live in a world that doesn't like to rewatch movies, why is it that most of the new movies feel like they need a villain? Especially the movies that try and help people escape or forget about problems or struggles they have in real life. Well, James M., interesting question. You know, I've often said with my favorite Star Trek episodes, Star Trek never had villains, they only have antagonists. And I think all the best villains think that they're right, so they don't think they're villains. And, you know, I really think it just depends on the movie. You know, for kids' movies, you have to have the dastardly, scheming villain with the twirling mustache, or somebody like Cruella de Vil, who everyone can point at and knows is a villain. I mean, I think that's part of drama and conflict. But yeah, I mean, I you know, sometimes the villain is a way of life. You know, look at Gandhi the movie that Richard Attenborough directed with Ben Kingsley playing Gandhi. I mean, the villain was was other human beings, but it was also the modes of behavior that we had. And it's not a mustache twirling villain, but there were villainous people. I just think that now villains are an easy shortcut to get to the crux, to get to the conflict. And good villains help us get there fast, and we don't have to think. So, yeah. But it's interesting. I mean, I look, does 2001, I mean, Hal goes crazy, but is he a villain? I guess he would be. But you're right. I just think that movies with villains, they just need to have conflict and they need to get us there quickly. But I mean, some of my favorite movies in the world have some of the greatest villains, like Die Hard, you know, Hans Gruber, one of the great villains of all time. Jack Nicholson is the Joker, or Heath Ledger is the Joker. Great stuff. I wouldn't trade those movies for the world. Christopher McCulloch is here. Mr. Burnett, I was originally going to write to you a response letter about comics, the comic industry, cynicism, and the Disneyfication of what was an outsider art, but I find I have so much to say about these things I've become quite stymied. I'm having trouble finding a middle ground between terse and dissertation. So instead, I'm going to talk about the last movie that made me cry. The movie in question is a biopic of Petey Greene I saw in high school called Talk to Me. I have no idea how well known Petey Greene is outside Washington, but it must be more than nothing if they made a movie. He was a DJ radio host in D.C. in the 60s and 1970s, and he was played by Don Cheadle. The scene in question takes place in the wake of Martin Luther King's assassination. The city is rioting, and in a darkened studio, Petey extemporizes on air on his anguish, being black in this country, experiencing hate, and being taken by its disruptive impulses. The scars of the rioting that took place in Washington after the murder of Martin Luther King could still be seen around the city when I was a kid. They still can be if you know where to look. Scars I've treated similarly to any of the monuments you find here, not to sound mawkish. I guess it's no mystery while I've been thinking about this lately, and honestly, I haven't revisited this movie since I saw it in theaters, so it might not even hold up. But it moved me when it did. I'd still recommend it, especially now. Well, Rob, I wrote this mostly to try and get past a block, but I'm curious what movie last moved you. I was just mostly verklempt, but I welled up enough to shed a tear. It hadn't happened for a long time before that, and not since. I sometimes worry about that. I think around 13 I stopped feeling sad and started feeling just angst. Go figure. Christopher, I call it priming the pump. I just came up with that, you know. Gosh, that's a good question. You know, I was really moved, which is not surprising considering, you know, what happened to the film with all the accolades it received. But 12 Years a Slave really profoundly moved me in many ways. And, yeah, it's the whole plight of this guy thinks, yeah, I've got this job, I'm going to go play some music. And then, of course, it was all a trick. And 12 years sold into slavery. His family didn't know where he was. The people he loved the most. I mean, the whole thing about it was, it worked on so many levels. Like, if you chose not to see a movie called 12 Years a Slave as a story about slavery and the black experience of America, it still was a horrific story about a man clinging to himself and not giving up under the most arduous of circumstances. The whole thing was just horrific, but it hit me on many different levels, and I was profoundly moved by that experience. So that was the last movie I remember that I was really totally moved by. I really was too. I mean, wow. Yeah. Speaking of that, I will read a letter from a guy who calls himself. Well, you know, I'm not going to read. I've been getting these harassing, insulting letters every day, and I read one. I won't read any more of his letters, but, you know. Let's see. There's so many letters to read. Let me jump back into what you guys are saying over here. I don't know where we are here. Let's see. Wow, I'm going back. Wow, you guys have all. Let's see. I've gotten two. Wow. Stub McShave goes on to say, "What did you think of the giant alien baby in the end of Alien 4? I thought it looked silly." Yeah, me too. The vaguely human alien hybrid, the newborn, the alien newborn. I thought it looked silly. The thing is, you know, the alien xenomorphs in Alien, again, the whole life cycle was presented. It was so perfect. It was so, you know, I understand the idea of diversifying the aliens, but they still were some of the greatest, if not the greatest, movie monsters ever with their life cycle. And I thought the more, every time you stray and change them, well, if they come out of a cow, they look different. I mean, that's an interesting idea, but yeah, I didn't like when they changed the design. I didn't like it. It looks silly. Alexander Wilson is here. Again, he says, being a fan of yours since I saw Free Enterprise in 2001. Well, thank you very much. I was very disappointed in the whole Twitter thing. I thought that stuff was beneath you. A lot of the times, the best thing to say is to say nothing at all. Hopefully, there is actually change. I agree with you, Alexander. That's why I apologized. You know, it was the video that really got to me. I mean, you know, it doesn't matter black, white. It doesn't matter what color you are. A 77-year-old, male or female, does not deserve to have their life end that way. And I couldn't stop thinking about my own grandfather and how I didn't know yet at the time. That's what I was thinking about. It was just seeing him dead on the sidewalk. It really just I was mad about that specific thing. I mean, sure, I've been mad about injustice and that, but that video, the tweet was inspired by that particular. I was just outraged. I was outraged that in a time where we're protesting and people of all walks of life were marching for how you know that we do not have the legacy in this country. How many of our black brothers and sisters have been cut down in their lives, America, for 400 years, and as we were marching, as people were marching for that, to see yet another victim of that on the sidewalk. I mean, people are like, well, what about everybody else? I'm just saying this particular thing hit me particularly hard. That image, that video of him, and it's you know, that's why I was angry about it. It's not that I wasn't angry about everything else too. But thank you. I thought it was beneath me as well. Absolutely. Koba sends in a tip and says, with the current climate, I wanted to mention a TV series that delves into the issues of equal rights by using androids. A TV show called Human by Channel 4. It's about a service androids who gain consciousness and begin to fight to live equally amongst humans. Yeah, I've seen some of that show. I like that show. It's good. It's good. Regis sends in a tip and says, to anyone interested in writing, Brandon Sanderson has a great 13-part lecture series on YouTube. Ooh, I would watch this, called Writing Science Fiction and Fantasy. Each part is a little more than an hour long. Highly recommended. Man, I didn't know that. I will totally watch that. That's amazing. Uh-oh. Alexander Wilson's coming at me. Did you talk to Claude about this? Claude, man. Oh, Alexander Wilson says, Skyfall was the best Bond movie because he failed. I failed before, and it made me a better person. It was the first time I could relate to him. Hall of Fame basketball coach John Thompson says, it's not how you start, it's how you finish. Yeah, but man, I've loved Bond my whole life, and I didn't like seeing him fail. I didn't like that he wasn't able to save M. I didn't like that at all. But I understand. There's a lot of people that love Skyfall. I do understand, and your point is well taken. I don't disagree with that point. But with Skyfall, I just didn't like it. Garen Gillum sends in a tip and says, I just read the trade paperback collection of the original Kree-Skrull War from the Avengers for the first time. These issues were originally published in 1971, the year of my birth. It's a great read. Neil Adams was ahead of his time. Such a fantastic artist. Well, it's funny that you say that. Let's see. I have the hardcover, and I love it. This is one of my favorite Avengers stories, and it is so good. And by the way, this edition of it is beautiful, and I mean the art. Look at that! Oh, wait, look at that Captain America right there. Yes, it's fantastic. It's so far ahead of its time, and yes. I mean, you got, look at that, Sal Buscema, Neil Adams, John Buscema, and Roy Thomas. Woo, what a lineup that is. I'm glad you got to read it because it's great. Stubble McShave says, I enjoyed Elizaviews on Jaws. Sadly, I can't watch it live since it's in the middle of the night for me. When watching the show, there was one thing I wanted to ask. What would your reaction be if they did a special edition of Jaws, Lucas style, with a CG shark? No, no, no. I would be incensed. I don't think there's any reason to do that. I don't think, just like with the Star Wars special editions, I don't think the CG adds to the movie at all. In fact, it detracts from the film because you're like, well, wait a minute, the verisimilitude's shattered. Oh, dude, I would go bananas. It would really bother me. Alexander Wilson goes on to say, I used to listen to the Fandom Menace and world-class bullshitters, but they lost me when they said Black Panther and Watchmen was racist against white people. How ignorant and disingenuous that notion is. You don't have to deal with this in basketball. You know what, Alexander? I've got to get those questions from you because I really want this Quinn Snyder thing. I've got to make it happen. And I love how much you love basketball. Yeah, I don't really. That's such a weird. Look, that that whole notion is such a strange. Look, why don't we just accept that around the world there have been people who hated people no matter what. They just didn't they? They just found the guy who bankrolled the Tutsi and the Hutu. Was the person who started all that. I mean, that's black on black violence in Africa. People are being hacked to death with machetes. Like, what? Because what? I mean, the problem is we all need more passports, man. We just got to travel and meet more people. The more people that you meet, the more you realize that color doesn't make much difference at all. And also, especially in this country, I hate that. I would say that if I'm a white dude, if I had 400 years of oppression, the way Black America has, I would say, oh, maybe we would have a choice, or we would have a case to say that it's racist against white people. I mean, but we don't. We are the oppressors. Like, what? Somebody gets a leg up and suddenly white people are being discriminated against? I thought Watchmen and Black Panther were incredibly empowering shows. I think it's there was a video on social media that it was these guys who were looking at the Black Panther poster for the first time, and there was somebody behind the camera, and there were these two guys going, this is what it's like to be white when you see this kind of representation all the time. And you could see how excited they were to see something like this, and they were making the point. And I watched that video like 20 times because the point really hit home with me. It's like, look, we take it for granted. Like, there's a poster. How many posters do you see these days, one sheets in movie theaters, where it's representing a movie that has a predominantly black cast? They spent $150 to $200 million to make. I mean, it's incredible. And I just don't understand. I mean, I get people saying that, but how does one thing make? Just drives me crazy. But I think there's going to be a lot of people watching Watchmen in media classes and analyzing what it all means for a long time to come, which I think is great. Lancelot Narion's back again. I was at a screening in London. Joel Silver was there. He went to the washroom at the same time. He did his business and walked out without washing his hands. The dirty bastard. Yeah, that's not good. Not good at all. Hassan sends in a tip and says, it pisses me off that Elizabeth is getting hate mail. Maybe you should close Facebook groups, stop paying attention to comment sections, and just interact with dollar supporters only. Real fans won't spend the money. Real fans will spend the money. Haters won't. Yeah, look, when you're dealing... I've been lucky in that I've been spared a lot of the online ire that has been thrown the way of other people. That's why it was so interesting that getting the online ire from people that I work with, I'm like, I must be doing something really terrible. But yeah, there's been this one guy sending really ugly, harassing mails, and to me and Elizabeth, and I'm like, so don't watch our show. And in the comment sections. But you're right. I mean, look, I have tried to have this community opened up, and I'm unfortunately, what I did could have been the most damaging thing to the community of all. I mean, I hope it will survive, but I don't want to close groups. I don't want to close places to go comment, or I'm certainly, you can write to my website and all of that. And I'm perfectly willing to entertain alternative points of view, as you well know. But I would hate if we had to close all these things down. I mean, if we have to, I will. But I would hope we wouldn't have to. Yeah. Anonymous says, "Hey Rob, have you seen or heard of Blood Machines?" I've watched it recently and it blew me away with its incredible visuals and further future Blade Runner-ish world. I loved it so much, it's now in my top 5. For those of you who don't know, Blood Machines is currently on Shudder. You can see it on Shudder. It is the follow-up. Blood Machines is a movie that is a follow-up to a music video called Turbo Killer. And Turbo Killer is a music video it's made by 2 French dudes, and they direct under the name Seth Eicherman. Now, I've talked about this before, but Turbo Killer, the music was done by Carpenter Brut, who's a French musician, who's it's synthwave, dark wave. It's all heavily influenced by bands like Tangerine Dream from the 80s. And Turbo Killer is this great piece of electronica. You could call it dark wave, synthwave, whatever, retro wave. And it borrows imagery from European Euro horror and science fiction films. And it's awesome. Go watch Turbo Killer on YouTube. So Blood Machines, I think it's 50 minutes long, is their follow-up. Seth Eicherman directed it. Carpenter Brut did the music, did the soundtrack music. I was a supporter. It was a crowdfunding campaign, and I supported that. And so I got the soundtrack album and all that. And it's fantastic. I mean, it's not for everybody's sensibility, but if you grew up with that stuff, if you liked Lucio Fulci's movies and you like Goblin and you liked all of those bands, and it's fantastic. So watch Turbo Killer. It's only like 3.5 minutes. If you like Turbo Killer, then go watch Blood Machines because it's awesome and it just expands all their ideas. So I'm glad you dug it. It's so good. Look who's here today. Dieter from Deutschland. Dieter, the German angel. Rob, just wanted to inform you the first package for you has left Saarbrücken, Deutschland. But I don't know how long it will take to get to you. Don't be upset if it doesn't include the titles you're most looking forward to. Second one is shipping Friday. Oh, you're the man. Dieter is who opened this show today, so thank you for that. Jason Bueno sent in a super chat and says, "Hot take, Prometheus rules. The ideas on creation sparked my imagination. Also, the Xeno is on the mural in the urn room, proving it came before David." Yeah, look, there's a lot of Prometheus I really like. I just thought that the ideas were half-baked, and they didn't do a great job exploring them. I wanted more, Jason, but it's certainly a great-looking movie. And I'll tell you something about that. If you get the 4-disc special edition if you get the 4-disc special edition, my friend Charlie De Lauzarica, who's he's the Steven Spielberg of behind-the-scenes documentaries. There's a 4.5-hour documentary on the making of that film that is essential to anyone who is interested in movies. And you see things about why didn't it succeed, why did it succeed. It's phenomenal stuff, and I highly recommend it to anyone who's interested in movies, even if you didn't like the movie as much. Jeffrey Mouse sends in a tip and says, "Bruce McDonald did direct Pontypool, and the reason why I know that is my first foray into YouTube or online film punditry was listening to the Film Junk podcast, a group of guys in Hamilton, Ontario. They mentioned Pontypool because of Stephen McCaddy. One of two. You must not have finished the next one." Stubble says, "I don't want a special edition Jaws. I just want to see your reaction to the concept." I'd hate it as well. Thanks a lot, Stubble. By the way, I wonder how you feel about that Dieter Bastian has made you the navigator on my new starship. Because if we ever find a time anomaly, you'll understand how the wheels of time work. I thought that was pretty damn funny. Honest Asian Guy sends in a tip and says, "Hi, Rob. Years ago, I sat in a theater and watched Chow Yun-Fat in The Replacement Killers. It is, still to this day, the loudest movie I've ever been to. I've been to many action films since then, but nothing quite as thunderous." You have a similar experience? Well, I would say I mean, when you go, it was for me again. It was original gangsters in my adult life. It was original gangsters and Pacific Rim. I saw Pacific Rim. I was so excited to see. By the way, I love Pacific Rim. Pacific Rim embodies everything I love in one place. I mean, it's. I mean, I once described. I once described. I think it was Pontypool. I think it was Pacific Rim, where I said. Well, no, I said this about Godzilla King of the Monsters, but like watching Godzilla King of the Monsters, but especially watching Pacific Rim was like if my 8-year-old self was sitting down with the mountain of Tony Montana Peruvian flake and just snorting up mountains of it. What happened to my brain is that's exactly what it was like for me to watch both Pacific Rim and Godzilla King of the Monsters. That's what it was like. So, yeah. So there you go, honest Asian guy. That's where I'm coming from. Hey, Claudius the Accuser is here. Claudius, are you gonna come after me too now that Alexander and you think are you more Skyfall? You're gonna throw Skyfall at me again? Claudius the Accuser sends in a tip and says, "Lo Watu, existential Mr. Rogers. Does that mean that you're also a former Navy SEAL?" Rob, I accuse you of crimes against the Kree and verisimilitude. James Bond is not a superhero. He is just a man. Unlike Ronan, he should not succeed every time. Come on, man. Come on. You know, I mean, I don't want to watch a movie where James Bond fails. I don't want him to learn a lesson. I understand. Everyone loves Skyfall. Claudius goes on to say, Lo Owatu, have you seen Phantom of the Paradise? I love Phantom of the Paradise. I own Phantom of the Paradise. That would be a good movie to do for Elizaviews, actually. A modern Faust and picture of Dorian Gray, directed by Brian De Palma with music by Paul Williams, pardon me. By the way, Paul Williams appears on Daft Punk's last album. This movie had a heavy influence on the duo Daft Punk and may have also influenced the look of Darth Vader. Oh, I think it absolutely did, because they were all Brian De Palma and George Lucas, when they were casting, they would cast together when Star Wars was being made. So I'm sure. I mean, they knew each other absolutely. That'd be a good movie to do on whining about movies. I think it's a really good idea. I love that idea. So yeah, that's good. Yeah, why not? Why not do that? Why not do that? I think that would be a good one to do. And let's see, I've got our man Ian Samuels. Let's see, I think I had an Ian Samuels letter, and I need to find it. It is. Here's Ian Samuels writes in. Rob and fellow Robservationists, the Joker, Batman's nemesis. In 1940, Bill Finger, Batman co-creator, saw the 1928 Universal silent classic The Man Who Laughs with German actor Conrad Veidt and was inspired to create the character of the Joker. Over the years, with different writers and artists, there have been various incarnations of the Joker. The first well-known adaptation is Cesar Romero's version in the Adam West 60s Batman. We got our first big-budget film version with Jack Nicholson in '89. Then we got a great vocal performance from Luke Skywalker, Mark Hamill in the animated series and video games. We were fortunate to see the seminal performance of Heath Ledger in The Dark Knight. Unfortunately, we also suffered the awful Jared Leto's performance in the equally awful Suicide Squad. Our minds were blown away by the Academy Award-winning performance of Joaquin Phoenix, and now Matt Reeves, director of The Batman, due for release next year, has announced that later in his trilogy, the Joker will return and play an important part in the overarching plot. Who do you think would be a good acting choice for Joker? I think Sam Rockwell would be a great Joker. That's not a bad idea. But if they wanted a totally different tack, perhaps someone like Wanda Sykes or Whoopi Goldberg. Wanda Sykes or Whoopi Goldberg as the Joker. Huh. I love both of them, by the way. I have Whoopi Goldberg as the header on my Facebook page as Mother Abigail from The Stand. You know what? I would hate to see what would happen to the fan community if they cast Wanda Sykes or Whoopi Goldberg as the Joker, but I would totally roll out for that. I'd be there for that. Because, what a different... Can you imagine? I mean, now I don't think I'll be able to not think about Wanda Sykes as the Joker. I kind of really want to see that now. What would that be like? Or Whoopi Goldberg? I don't know if they might be a little old, not to be ageist, but I mean, do you need it? Robert Pattinson's a young man. I guess the Joker could be much older than him, but what an interesting idea. I like that idea. I like that idea. So I'm looking, Jeff. I hope that one of two. There was no the second part. I hope I didn't miss any. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I've got, again, a deluge of letters. I'm trying to get through them all. If I haven't got to yours, I will get to it. I've gotten so many letters, and I want to thank all of you for the generous support of the channel and sending in all the lovely letters you send in. What a great community we have here. As you all know, I'm back on the John Campea show, and tomorrow I will be back. I will be back on this show. I will be back on the John Campea show, and we will be doing another Elizaviews whining about movies tomorrow night, which I don't know what it is. I don't know what it's going to be. So, yeah. Well, I don't know. So anyway, remember, as Robservations episode number 437 comes to an end, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And I mean that sincerely. I want to thank my moderating staff. I want to thank Mike Bodden. I want to thank Detective Jim Boyers and his wife Heidi. I want to thank Greg Smith. I want to thank Jordy Lyons. I want to thank Louis Yu. And I also want to thank the Richard, who's always showing something fun over on the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page or the Whining About Movies Facebook page. He's always throwing watch parties and all kinds of things like that. So go check him out and tell him I sent you there. So, and with that, I will also end by saying, as you all know, have a better day.